Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I am the managing partner at Scott Legal. And today we are going to talk about the EB-5 program and considerations when looking at EB-5, both for direct investments and for regional centers. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, so you can get a copy of it on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel because we have a number of different immigration videos that we post on a regular basis. We do a couple of webinars a week, and we also post other informational immigration videos on our YouTube channel. If you hit the subscribe button, you'll receive a notification. The other thing we're going to send you after this, or some of the things we're going to send you after this webinar, we will send a copy of this PowerPoint presentation and the link to where you can actually view the YouTube video. We will also send you an EB-5 guide. It's a guide that goes over a lot of the information that we are going to go over today in more detail. So it's a handy, useful guide that you may be able to use. And then we also will send you a link to where you can set up a consultation if you do have any additional questions. And if you do have questions during the presentation, you can put those questions into the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to all questions. So let's jump right in. So first, let's look at the two different types of EB-5 programs. So one is regional center, and the other one is direct investment. And the difference between these can really be described well by looking at the type of investor that typically is engaged in EB-5. So when you are looking at a regional center, usually the person just wants the green card. They are looking at a much more passive investment. They're fine paying a fairly high administrative fees, maybe $35,000, $45,000, or $50,000. These are projects. So regional center would be, for example, let's say that a hotel chain wanted to raise investor funds through the EB-5 program. They could do that, and they could collect $800,000 from each person, and they would be responsible for creating the jobs. And we'll get into that in a bit more detail. And that is the way that 90% or so of the people who invest in the EB-5 program invest through this program, where it is the regional center. And that contrasts to a direct investment, and it can only be one investor per entity. And that would be maybe someone who's on an E2 visa, and they're on an E2 visa, and then they decide that they want to get a green card, and they invest more money. So either they've already invested the $800,000, or they invest the $800,000 or $1,050,000. We're going to go into those details a bit more later. But then they're responsible for the job creation. So these people their profile is really, a person who wants to be in control of their own destiny and wants to be able to, kind of manage returns, manage the whole process. And so, again, that's typically people we see that do direct investment do it when they are, moving from an E2 to an EB-5. But definitely both are similar in terms of the statute, in terms of ability to get a green card, but definitely you see the risk profile a little different. So the key requirements with when you're looking at EB-5 is investing money, and we're going to talk about that in more detail, and creating jobs, right? So those are the key two requirements. And then the other thing we're going to do during this presentation is spend some time looking at exactly what you filed when you're doing an EB-5 petition. So when you're doing an EB-5, you either have to invest $800,000 or $1,050,000, and that's the amount is going to depend on whether you are investing in a targeted employment area or not. So you can do EB-5 where you invest in a new business, you can invest in, start a business, you can invest in an existing business. You can't do EB-5 if you're actually just buying an existing business, right? So you give the money, $800,000 or $1,050,000 to the seller, and you get the business. That's not good for EB-5. Now, when you look at the target employment area, so the lower amount, that's going to be either an area where the unemployment rate is 1.5 times the national average, or it's going to be a rural area. So any other investment, it's going to be, if it's located in any other place, then you're going to have to invest the full $1,050,000. But if it's in one of those other areas, you can invest the $800,000. And you have to be very careful to include only things that are considered investment under the EB-5 program. So you can't use things money that you pay on administrative fees, like if you pay the administrative fee to the regional center or you pay the legal fees, the 800,000 can't go towards that. It has to go towards the actual creating jobs, right? So that's very important. And the other thing to keep in mind is you can't use it has to be money that is invested, and money that is invested that was in your personal possession and then invested into the company. So let's say you had an E2 entity and you ended up making money. So let's say you have an E2 entity and your E2 entity ended up making $2 million and that money sat in retained earnings. And you said, hey, well, I'm going to spend that the next year, and then that should classify as an investment, and then I can apply for an EB-5 after that. Well, that doesn't count because the money, that's just retained earnings. It's not money that you've actually invested. So the money has to be outside the company and invested into the company. And the other kind of big thing, as I said, a lot of people move from E2 to EB-5, is that the E2 also has a requirement that you have to show where the money came from. It's called the source of funds analysis. But that analysis is far, far more difficult when you're doing EB-5. It's like we could multiply it by 100 when you're doing EB-5. It is much, much more like an audit. So it's, if you're selling a home, you have to show money where you got the money to buy the home. If the home was collateralized, you have to show detail related to the collateral. So just a lot more detail you have to provide when you're looking at EB-5 source of funds. And really, when you're looking at EB-5 regional center, often the source of funds analysis is the only thing that you're focusing on because the project is, may have already been approved. And then it can't be debt. It has to be some type of equity. So it could be a membership unit, a share, or partnership unit, or something like that. So the other big part of we said one big part is the investment. The other big part is the creation of jobs. So you have to create 10 full-time jobs, and these jobs have to be jobs that are for U.S. citizens or green card holders. And the direct versus indirect jobs, if you're doing the direct investment program, then the jobs have to actually be direct jobs, the people who are working for your entity. If you are doing regional center program, then they can look at the other jobs that that particular business will create by virtue of it being there. So if there's a dry cleaner down the street or a grocery store down the street, and an economist can come up with a report that shows that these indirect jobs were created. And there has to be a link between the creation of the jobs and the investment. So if a company, for example, if you're investing in a particular company and they already have employees, then you're not going to be able to count those employees because your investment didn't create those employees. Both regional centers and direct investments have detailed business plans, and they should really specify the details of what it is that you're doing. And you have to make sure that the people are actually U.S. citizens or green card holders. So it's good to register for something called E-Verify so that you can make sure that that actually is the case. So the petitions you're going to file an I-526 petition. That's going to be the one that shows you've made the investment and that you're going to be capable of hiring full-time workers. If you are in the United States, then you have the option to file an I-485 petition as long as the category is current. If you're investing under the $800,000 regime, the TA, then all the categories are going to be current. If you are doing the $1,050,000, then you have to look to see which country you're from to see if the categories are current, because right now India and China are both backlogged. If you're outside of the United States, you're going to be doing consular processing. And then you have to remember that once you get the green card, 2 years after you get the green card, you have to file another petition, which is a petition for consular process, petition to remove the conditions to show that you actually have created the 10 full-time jobs. That's an I-829 petition. So these changes to the program occurred in 2022. So the investment amount, the non-standard amount, the higher amount increased to $1,050,000. It used to be $1 million. The lower increased from 500 to 800,000. So that was a really big increase. The other one, not so much. The regional center program requires authorization periodically. So it's been authorized until 2027. So this program is going to be around at least until then. and likely will be reauthorized even then. And it's also, the program said that if the government hasn't reauthorized the program in time, then they can still adjudicate petitions as long as they were filed before September 30th, 2026. And they did modify the rules a little bit to make the TA zones a bit more difficult to qualify, but I think it's still fair. And then they did a set aside. And the set aside is, that's why the category is current for every country, because if you fall into one of these areas, if the project's in a rural area, high unemployment area, or infrastructure area, then it allows you still to be able to file the I-485 petition. The other big change is this concurrent filing that I just talked about. That wasn't possible before. Before, you had to wait till the I-526 petition had been approved before you could file the I-485. But now the filing of the I-485 gives you really the ability to stay in the United States, which is amazing, while it's pending. And if you can file an I-485, then you can file for travel and work authorization as well. The other source of funds change that they made was that they no longer they don't make you they make you actually prove source of funds on the money that you use for the administrative fees and the filing fees. And then there's some more provisions for changing the program. If, for example, like your regional center gets hit by a tornado or something like that, and the project is destroyed, then there might be ability to change programs. What else to consider? So, if you're doing direct investment, you can't do something like just put money in a bank account and leave it there. It's not just the intent to invest. You have to have commitments or have money spent. Loans and gifts are fine for EB-5, but you do have to show, if there are loans and gifts, you do have to show where the person got the money to buy but where they got the money to give the loans or the gifts. So if you got, your parents gave you a gift of $800,000, you have to show where they got the money, the same way that you would have to show where you got the money. You can't, I said this before already, you can't do EB-5 where you're purchasing a business, because that money doesn't go towards the creation of jobs. And there's no requirement with respect to how much you own. E2, you have to own at least 50% of the company, but not with EB-5. You can own even a fraction of a percentage. And you can't have any guaranteed return of investment in your, in this process. That can't exist, unfortunately, because that will nullify the filing. We talked about some differences between E2 and moving to EB-5. Some things that can be counted for investment in E2 can't be counted in EB-5. The job creation for E2 is not specific, whereas EB-5 it is. And then E2 also allows you to buy a business, but EB-5 doesn't permit you to do that. So some other things that you should be aware of. Timing considerations. This unfortunately takes a long time. It takes a really, really long time. So it can be 4 to 5 years before you get your I-526 approved, which is a long time. And as I mentioned, there are country-specific quotas, but the carve-outs really help with that. So if you're in the United States and you file the I-485 petition, then you do have to kind of keep in mind that you do have to maintain some underlying status. And then you do have to also keep in mind that when you file an I-485 petition, normally you can't travel right away unless you have certain types of visas like an H-1B. You can't, normally travel immediately. So that's something to keep in mind. Then sometimes, depending on your underlying visa, like let's say you have a TN visa or some visa that's not a dual intent visa, that can be problematic. So you have to really make sure that you're planning accordingly, and planning really is the key. And we do have people that engage in a parallel green card strategy. So they might apply for a NIW and then also apply for EB-5 because they want to make sure they're hedging their bets. So that's something to keep in mind. Perfect. So those were all of the prepared remarks that I had. We can move to any questions or answers. I'm just going to go to see if anything is in the chat. No, I don't see anything. So yeah, so definitely, as I said, we're going to send out a number of pieces of information to you, and you can set up a consultation, and definitely happy to go through that and assist with anything that's needed. Thank you.